to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're going to be working on a beginner-friendly pattern, and I am going to attempt to make it on a beginner bag-making sewing machine. Today, we're going to be making the Muerqo tote from Country Cow Designs. Now, if I am butchering the name, I do apologize. I'm very bad at pronouncing names, even easy names. But this right here, this beauty, this is the Muerqo tote. And it is so cute. It only has one zipper. So for those of you who have been wanting to make a tote, you've been wanting to kind of try a zipper, this is a great bag to try it out on because it's an easy zipper too. There's not a whole lot of technique with this zipper. So you can see on the front, we have this main panel here, and you have a zipper pocket. On the back, you have another main panel, and this one you have like a little secret slip pocket, which I love. I love a pocket next to the body. It's where I put my cell phone, things like that. And then on the inside, no pockets. You can definitely add pockets to this if you'd like to, but they're not in the pattern. It's just nice and open. It's a great like everyday tote bag. For closure, we do have two magnetic snaps. However, the usefulness of that is going to depend on the material you're using. Also, we have these beautiful O-rings. So these were something that I did have to purchase. I didn't have these on hand normally, but I love the look of them. And then we do have like some really nice little strap ends on the ends of our straps. So this bag I made on my industrial sewing machine. And my industrial sewing machine is a Juki 1541S. I always forget the number. It's a Juki 1541S. It is a heavy duty machine. I was using some heavy duty material here. So if you want to make a bag like this with really thick stuff like leather and all that other stuff, an industrial machine is going to make that easier to do simply because it's got a lot of power. It's got lots of power. It's going to get through everything. So it worked out pretty well on this bag. However, there definitely were some challenges, and we'll get into that in a little bit. This tote bag, the way the pattern is written, it is a drop-in lining. And if you don't know what that means, what it means is we build the exterior of the bag completely. We build the lining of the bag completely, both separately, both completely built. And then we take the lining and we drop it into the exterior as it's going to be when it's finished. And then we just top stitch around the top edge. Some people find this a very easy method. Some people do not like this method at all. I will be showing you how to do the drop-in lining today. However, I do believe this is the type of pattern, again, depending on the material you're using, this is the type of pattern that you could adjust a little bit so it's not a drop-in lining, and then just, you know, kind of berth it and close the bottom as we do in other bags. So I'm not going to show you that today. I am going to show you a drop-in method because I do feel like knowing how to do that is important. The thing I love so much about this bag, besides the size and just like how beautiful it is the structure. The way that they use interfacing and stabilizer in this is really clever. It is something I've never seen before. I've never seen this technique of layering and cutting them in different ways to get this really firm structure. I mean, this thing can take a beating. This is not something you're going to be smushing in the back of your car. It's not going to smush, which is fantastic as a bag, but can make it a little bit difficult when you're sewing. So my everyday sewing machine is a Bernina 770, which is kind of like a semi-industrial machine. It can really do a lot, which is pretty impressive. However, it is in the shop currently because it misbehaved and it needs to be fixed. So I took to social media and I put out a vote. I said, would you like me to do the tutorial over this bag using my industrial sewing machine or my baby machine? So my baby machine is a Bernina 350. It is a smaller machine. I'll have a picture of it right over here. It is a smaller machine. It is definitely power level what most domestic beginner machines would be like. They voted the beginner machine. That's what we're gonna go with today. I actually purchased my Bernina 350 for making quilt blocks. Not even to quilt things, just as like a travel machine for just piecing together quilt blocks. I never bought it with the intention of making bags. So we're gonna see how this goes. We're gonna see if we can make a bag like this on a small domestic machine. Big bag, small machine. We'll see. So if you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shout outs, anything at all, leave them down in the comment sections. As always, there will be timestamps for every single step of this tutorial. So if there's just one part you're looking for, you can just slide over that timestamp and it'll take you straight there in the video. You can find those timestamps running right along the bottom of this screen, or you can expand the description over here and all the timestamps as well as links to all the products and the pattern will be listed in the description. As always, thank you so much to Country Cow Designs for allowing me to use your patterns in my tutorials. They make some of the coolest bags. It's another one of those designers where they really like think outside of the box. Like this, you can think like, oh, it's just a basic tote, but it's not a basic tote. The way that the accents come together, the way the stabilizer comes together, it's not a basic tote. It's so much better. It's the type of tote that you would spend a lot of money for at some nice stores. I'm just saying, like the structure of this will be a very fancy bag if it was sold at the most magical place on earth. All right, guys, let's get started. So for the exterior fabric, I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. And you can see in most of the bag designs that she has in the pattern, there are two different versions. So for like the center of the bag, the center feature design, I'm gonna be using this quilt cotton right here. And this is just a lightweight quilt cotton. On the first bag, I did use a more heavyweight vinyl. It really just depends on what you're comfortable with sewing. Since I'm using quilt cotton, I will be using quite a bit of interfacing today. And then for the sides and the straps and the base, I'm gonna use cork. I do like to incorporate some sort of more durable material. Now this cork is actually a very thin cork, so you don't have to use really thick stuff. This is a much thinner cork, so I think this is gonna do okay on my machine, but still add some nice structure to the bag. And then to really help with the structure of the bag, I'm using waterproof canvas as the lining. Now this is kind of like a nice little trick for bags. If you wanna use lightweight material for the exterior, but you still want the bag to have some shape to it, use waterproof canvas for the lining. The nice thing about waterproof canvas is that it's easy to keep clean. You don't have to interface it. And this waterproof canvas is from Wonderground Fabric, so it's not super stiff, but it is firm enough to help hold the shape of your bag. So you're gonna need about 2/3 of a yard total for your exterior. I would get a 1/2 yard of each one of these. And then for the lining, you're gonna need about 3/4 of a yard. I would get 1 yard. So here's the interfacing I'll be using today. I am using this Sew Fuse. This is from Castine Handcrafted. This is just a woven interfacing. You could also use Pell-On Shape Flex. Since I'm using quilt cotton, I will be using this. So anything that has quilt cotton, unless the pattern specifically says don't apply this to it, you're gonna apply this to it. So it just depends how much quilt cotton you're using. You might need up to 2 yards of this. You might need significantly less. On my first bag, I didn't use any of this at all because I didn't need to. Next, I have Decoville Light. You can see this is just like scraps left of it, but you don't need a whole lot of Decoville Light. You're just gonna use some of it, and it's really interesting how the interfacing works on this bag. I'm excited to show you, but you're gonna have your Decoville Light. You're gonna need about 1/2 yard of that. And then finally, Peltex. You could also use Decoville Heavy. I usually do prefer Decoville Heavy, but I'm actually out of it. So I'm using Peltex today, and it actually works out really, really well. I used it on the first bag as well. This combination with the lining is really neat, and I really like it. So you're gonna need about 1/3 of a yard of your Peltex or Decoville Heavy. So here's a bunch of the hardware we'll be using today. You're going to need some zipper tape, so 11 inches or longer, and then a zipper pull to go with that. I'm using magnetic snaps that are riveted on, which I highly, highly suggest if you have a rivet press. I do suggest you look into these riveted magnetic snaps, even if you're not gonna see the rivet in the end. So these are great if you are gonna be seeing the back side of the magnetic snap, but even if you're not gonna see that, this is so smooth, you don't have to worry about it ripping through your lining fabric, your exterior fabric, wherever it's rubbing, you don't have to worry about it damaging the material like you do with the magnetic snaps that have the prongs. So I have 1 set of magnetic snaps, and then I have some strap ends. These are 3/4 of an inch strap ends. These are not required, they are optional, but they do add a nice finish. So you need 4 of those, and then the teeny tiny screws that go with it. I will be using rivets today as a little decorative accent and to help really make the straps sturdy. And then 4 O-rings that are 1.5 inches wide. Now these are really, really cool. And I know I had to specifically buy these. These are not something I normally have on hand, but the look it gives the bag is so good. So you're gonna need 4 of those. All right, here's all the other stuff. As always, a nice healthy supply of clips. I have some super sticky double-sided tape. This is for holding pieces down that I'm hoping I don't sew over. So this tape is really, really helpful. Next, I have my stiletto and then my seam ripper stiletto combo. Tiny screwdrivers to go with the strap ends. If you're not using strap ends, you don't need these. A lighter is a very helpful tool in the sewing room. And then I have my dies for my magnetic snaps. You'll see this is the combo here. If you use the magnetic snaps for your press, you just need to get the right dies for it. For marking on my material, I have an air erasing marker as well as a chalk pencil. I also will have my vinyl marker in there just in case. Even though I don't really have vinyl today, this can still be helpful. And then I have a turning tool, again, just in case. I don't think I'm gonna need this today, but I always have it on hand. The needles I'm using are Microtex 8012. I have some scraps of Decovil Light. This is just gonna help with the magnetic snaps and other pieces to just reinforce things. For the bobbin thread, I have my Gutermann thread. This is just from Joann's. For the top thread, I might use this Tex 35 weight thread, but I've never used this thread on the smaller machine. So just in case that doesn't work out, I also have my Mara 70 weight, which I know will work on pretty much every machine. Okay, this is a little funny because this is a machine that I've always used with quilting, and I really didn't use this machine once I got really into bag making. I don't actually have a zipper foot for it, so I'm going to be using a combination of a walking foot for my smaller machine today, and then this is the Bernina foot 37, and this is the patchwork foot, and that just has more of a narrow base here. So we're gonna be creative with the zipper today because I don't actually have a zipper foot for this machine, which I'll have to get. Also, I have my rivet press. This is from Cam Snaps. I have a whole video going over this, but this is my rivet press with the rivet die already on it. So let's go over these pattern pieces. I know some of them are a little folded. We should be able to smooth them out as we work. So we have 2 of these cuts for our straps, and the measurements for this are in the pattern. These are not adjustable straps. This is not a crossbody bag. These are 2 shoulder straps, and I'm using that cork for it. I do suggest using something a little bit more durable. Maybe you could use the waterproof canvas, you could use cork, you could use vinyl, something more durable for the straps. From the same cork material, we have pieces G, A, and D. So piece G is just 1 rectangle, and this is actually going to be the base of the bag. This is going to go over your bigger panels, you'll see. But this is the base of your bag. Piece A, you're going to need 2 of each of these cuts. So 2 like this, and then 2 like this, okay? You're gonna use these for the front and back, and you need to surround it like that. So you need 2 of each mirrored. And then you're gonna have 4 pieces for piece D, and these are going to be the connectors for the O-rings that attach to the bag. All right, next I have the woven material that I'm using. This is like the feature fabric, right? So you're gonna have this one here. This is piece F. And I am not quilting this. Now that is the recommendation of the bag, is to quilt this. And if you're using woven material, what you're gonna do is you're going to cut it at this bigger size here. See how this template's a little bit bigger than my cut? You're gonna cut it at that bigger size. Then you're gonna apply fusible fleece to it, and then you're gonna quilt it real nicely, and then you're gonna trim it down to this smaller size, just like that. I'm not quilting mine today, but if you are, just make sure you do that. And if you're just using vinyl, you can just start at the smaller size. So this is piece F. This is like the front of the bag. To go with it, you have piece C, which is going to be the top of the zipper. So you can see you're going to have your little zipper dividing these 2 pieces right here. For the back of the bag, you have just a longer piece. And once again, if you're going to be quilting it, make sure you cut your quilt cotton out at a bigger size. Fuse your fusible fleece on. Quilt it real nicely, and then trim it down to the smaller size. Whenever you quilt something, it tends to shrink, which is why we cut it bigger, quilt it, cut it down. And then for the top of the front and the back, you're gonna have 2 pieces of piece B, and this is not quilted or anything like that. All of this is quilt cotton, and it all already has the sew fuse applied to the back of it. So from the lining, you're gonna have 2 pieces of H. So we don't have any lining pockets here. It's nice and simple on the inside, just a nice big opening. If you wanted to add a slip pocket, you could. If you wanted to add a zipper pocket, you could. To keep it simple though, you don't have to. So just 2 nice big cuts of this. Since I'm using waterproof canvas, there's no interfacing on this yet. If you're using quilt cotton, go ahead and add your woven interfacing to this. Also from the lining, we have pieces I and J. From piece I, you're gonna have 2 cuts. This is for the slip pocket. And then from piece J, you're gonna have 2 cuts. This is for the zipper pocket. So the slip pocket goes on the back of the bag, the zipper pocket goes on the front of the bag. And then we have our extra interfacing pieces. Piece L is your Decoville light. You're gonna have 2 cuts of that. We're actually gonna attach this to the lining. And then from piece K, you're gonna have your base. We're gonna wrap that cork around this and apply it to the bottom of the bag. And then from piece M, you have 2 cuts here, and this is also gonna go on the lining over the Decoville light. All right, to get started, let's work on these handle connectors. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna flip your 4 handle connectors over, and you're gonna grab a roller and draw a line right down the center of each one of these on the back side. So once you have those marked, if you're using quill cotton here, you might wanna add a skinny strip of Decoville light right down the edge here just to really reinforce these. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna fold the material wrong sides together so that this long raw edge meets that midpoint mark. So they're pretty skinny. To help with that, I am gonna be using my double-sided tape. I don't anticipate sewing right down the center, so I'm just gonna line up my tape right over my midpoint mark on all 4 of them. There we go. And what you can do is actually just cut one long strip first if you want, and then cut it down later, but I'm just gonna keep it like this. And then what I'm gonna do is go piece by piece and just fold those long raw edges to meet the midpoint mark and push down with my fingers. And this tape is nice because it is so sticky. You don't really have to worry about it popping back up. But if you're using a tape that's not as sticky, you can also grab some clips and clip along the folded edge to hold everything in place. Okay, now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew along these long folded edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're just top stitching along both long edges of each one of these. You can see I have it taped together. I'm just gonna leave it like that while I sew it. So now that we have these top stitched, we're gonna flip them over and I'm gonna mark on the back, just on one end of each one of these. I'm gonna mark 1/2 inch up on the back side on one of the short ends on each one of these. So now I'll take a strap connector and an O-ring and just loop my O-ring and wrap the strap connector wrong sides together around it. But then the short edge that doesn't have a mark on it, I'm gonna pull that down so that it lines up with that 1/2 inch mark. So you can see I'm not going all the way end to end. I'm just pulling it down to that 1/2 inch mark we made on the back side of the other short end. And then I'll just grab a clip to hold that in place for now. So do this for all 4 of them, just wrapping it around, not all the way down short end to short end, but short end to 1/2 inch mark. All right, so once you have them clipped and you know that's where you want them, that's when you can grab just like a small 1/2 inch cut of your double-sided tape and then just lift this up and use your double-sided tape to hold this in place, because later on when we attach these, we're not gonna wanna have those clips in the way. So I'm just gonna put that in there, put it together, there we go. So do this for all 4 of them, just prepping our rings. All right, once you have these straps and O-rings prepped, go ahead and put them to the side. So now grab your bag straps and you're gonna mark a midpoint line on the wrong side, on the back, along the long edge. And then what you're gonna do is you're just gonna fold your material wrong sides together up to meet that midpoint line. Now, if your machine can sew over tape, double-sided tape, you can go ahead and add the double-sided tape along this midpoint line. However, I don't think I want to put my little baby machine to the test with that. So I'm just gonna use clips. You could also use an iron here if you're using quill cotton or any sort of material that you can press with an iron. But I'm just gonna go along and finger press it and add clips. So once you have both edges clipped down, then you're just gonna fold the whole unit in half and then just clip them together like that. All right, go ahead and repeat that with the other strap as well. So once you have both of these prepped, now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch along both long edges at an 1/8 inch and also at a 1/4 inch. So you should have 4 rows of top stitching. This gives it a really nice look, but it also holds the strap together really well. I just wanna mention, if you're not gonna be using a strap end, like my little metal strap end, what you're gonna wanna do before you top stitch this is fold it open like this, or unfold it. Fold down that edge about 3/8 of an inch and then refold it. I could probably do that with this cork because it is so thin. And see, now you have a nice folded edge that doesn't have an unfinished side. So if you're not using these metal strap ends, just make sure you fold down all of your short edges in about 3/8 of an inch. Whatever is comfortable for you, just make sure you make it the same size on all of them, because these straps need to be the same size. So if you fold it down 1/2 of an inch over here, all of them need to be folded in 1/2 of an inch. actually decided to just do 1/8 of an inch top stitching on both sides and not the 1/4 inch top stitching, because when I added the rivets on the other bag, I did end up cutting through some of that top stitching, and with the type of thread I'm using, it just kind of sticks out, unravels. It's kind of a mess with glue and stuff to fix that. So I'm going to just do 1/8 of an inch top stitching on each side. That way I have a nice open space for my rivets later. So you could attach your strap ends now if you'd like. I think I'm gonna wait. Actually, let's go ahead and attach the strap ends real quick. That way we don't have to do it later, and that will give the glue time to dry and everything time to set. Forgot to mention this in the beginning, but I also like to use Beacon 3-in-1 glue. My bottle is big, it's empty, so I'm gonna let the glue kind of come down to the bottom real quick. So what we're going to do is we're gonna need our strap ends, these little metal strap ends, the screws, and your screwdriver. So these are Phillips. I need this little guy here. I like to take all the screws and just kind of dump them into this tray. Now the screwdrivers I'm using are magnetic, which makes it pretty easy to pick up those tiny little screws. Just don't lose them. Just don't lose them. And I'm also going to use the stiletto to help with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip the straps over so that you're looking at the back side of them. If you have any little bits of thread like I do, they're just kind of hanging off and you don't want them to get in your way, you can trim them or you can burn them. Burning them actually helps them tuck in and prevents, if you trim them, you might just have it go back a little bit. So I like to burn them. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take one of my strap ends, I'm gonna put it in upside down. So the back side has the holes for the screws. I'm gonna put that so that the back side's on the back side of my strap, kind of fit it in there where I want it. Then I'm gonna take my stiletto and just poke holes through my cork where my screws are gonna go. Just little tiny holes. And then I'm going to take my Beacon 3-in-1 glue. I'm going to put a really light layer right along the edge of my strap, just like that. And then I'm going to attach the strap end. And then I'll take my screws and screw into those holes. And I find that this combination helps really well. Now, you're not going to have a whole lot of pressure on these strap ends, so you don't really have to worry about anything pulling these things off. But you don't want them to fall off. So if you're not sure if these straps are going to be too long or not for you, then wait until later in the pattern when your bag is done, and that way you can trim them down if you need to. I already have made this, so I know that this is good. All right, so when you see, you flip it over. Isn't that a sweet little finish to it? So I'm just gonna repeat that for the other 3 ends. All righty, look at those. Isn't that cute? It's just a really professional, nice finish. So you can put your straps to the side now. This is gonna save you some time in the end. All right, last bit of prep is if you're using zipper tape and a separate zipper pull, just go ahead and make sure you put your zipper pull on your zipper tape. If you'd like to stitch down the ends of your zipper tape so that you don't have to worry about this pull coming off at any point, you can go ahead and do that. I know it did come off for me earlier, but there you go. So now your zipper is prepped. Since I'm not quilting my material, I'm skipping that step. If you are quilting your material, just make sure you go over that step really well. So start with your exterior back top panel. And on the bottom edge, so if you have a directional print, make sure you think about that. On the bottom edge here, we're gonna measure in 1 inch and mark right in the seam allowance. Can't see it with that one. Let's see if we can see it with this one better. Once you have that marked, you're gonna take one of your strap connectors and you're gonna measure 3/4 of an inch from the top of the fold inside the O-ring. So I just lay it over my ruler like this. And then using an air erasing marker, I'm just going to mark where that is. There we go. So do this for both of your strap connectors with the O-rings on them. So now take one of your strap connectors with the O-rings, and with the shorter edge, so remember we have a shorter side here that's a little bit raised up, that's gonna go down against the fabric so that you just have the longer edge on the front. And you're going to lay it to the right of that left 1 inch mark. So it's going to be 1 inch in, right? Lay it just like that. And you can use clips or you can use tape here, whatever's easier for you, and pin it in place like that. And now we're gonna take this to the machine and we're gonna top stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge up until we get to that 3/4 of an inch mark. And then we're gonna go over and top stitch down to the other mark. So you're just making a nice little rectangle here. This is also why you did a 1/4 inch seam allowance before, so that your 1/8 of an inch seam allowance is a separate stitch. All right, so once you have one of these done, we're gonna repeat that on the other side. So this one, again, you're gonna have that short edge here down against the fabric. So you just have this nice long edge over here. And you're going to line it up to the left of the right 1-inch mark. And use a clip to hold it in place, or tape, whatever is easiest for you. And then once again, we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch from the bottom up to that 3/4 of an inch mark, across, and then back down the other side. Ooh, that looks so pretty, doesn't it? I love these colors together. I was kind of worried about the rose gold with this, but I think it was a good choice. So now I'm going to add rivets. You don't have to add rivets here, but if you don't, you want to sew something right here above that 3/4 of an inch mark that you made. Rivets, honestly, are the best way to go. Since we're doing rivets on quilt cotton, which is pretty lightweight, we are going to add a piece of Decoville Light to the back of it, just because we don't want the rivets to eventually kind of rip the quilt cotton. So I'm just going to cut little squares out here to use with my rivets. So this rivet press here has a hole punch die attached to it already. I'm just going to stack my Decoville Lights and punch a hole right in the center of those little pieces. There we go. Now you can mark this beforehand, or you can just kind of eyeball it, but what I'm going to do is just punch a hole centered between the bottom edge of my O-ring and the top edge of that top stitching, that 3/4 of an inch mark. Okay, so there's that hole if you need to poke out the fabric. Now I'm going to grab my rivets, and then I'm just going to put a rivet through the material, flip it over, grab one of my pieces of Decoville Light, put that over it, and then put the back of the rivet on top of it, just like that. And that should protect it really nicely. So I'm going to do the same thing with the other O-ring. So now I'm just going to grab my rivet press that has the rivet die on it, and I'm just going to press these and set them. All right, so these are on here. We'll have to see how that holds up compared to the vinyl. It's very, very sturdy on the vinyl one I did, but we'll have to see with this quilt cotton. Since I didn't add any big stuff to the back of this, we'll see how it goes. Before you move on, just grab your other exterior top piece and the remaining 2 O-rings and repeat that same process. All right, once you have both of these done, set one to the side and we'll use it in just a little bit. All right, so now you're gonna grab your slip pocket lining piece, it's piece I. Take one of them and lay it right side up and match it up with the top exterior piece just like that. So that obviously is not the right way. We're gonna do it this way. And then take that top exterior piece and lay it right side down along the top edge of the lining. And I'm going to use clips here to hold these two together. So now we're going to sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have that sewn on, you're going to flip this up so that the seam goes below the lining. So the seam goes down. And give it a good press. You can either press this with an iron or press it with your fingers. Another option I always like to mention is one of these little rollers here, whatever's easiest. So now we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to top stitch along the bottom edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, just making sure we're catching that lining. Keep it as flat as possible. This is actually a little bit easier to do when you have vinyl because it doesn't wrinkle so much. So just keep this as flat as possible. I'll show you, I just realized that I put my waterproof canvas on upside down. This is the back, this is the front. That's why we have a seam ripper, right? So I'm just gonna quickly seam rip this, re-sew it, and top stitch. So once you have that top stitch set to the side for just a moment, take your exterior back panel and lay it right side up. If you have a directional print, make sure the directional top is right here. Grab the remaining slip pocket and then lay that right side down, matching up the edges on the top, just like that. And you can clip this in place to hold in place. Now let's sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now for this seam, I am going to press it with an iron. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the slip panel and I'm going to fold it up, right side up, and then just finger press right along that seam. And then I'm going to take my iron and press along it. Now I can do this because this panel here is not vinyl. And actually what's nice about, especially this waterproof canvas, is that when you do that, you're kind of melting the plastic on the back of the waterproof canvas and it melts to itself. So now that is like nice and crisp and it's almost like a tape. It's like it taped itself together. So then I can fold the whole unit. And I suggest folding it with your exterior fabric up so that way if your lining is rolling over, you notice it and you can kind of catch it and roll it so that it's not. Make sure the edges of the exterior panel and that slip pocket are lined up, and then just press along that top edge to get a nice clean top edge for your pocket. All right, once you have that nice and pressed, go ahead and top stitch along this edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now take your exterior top with the lining panel and lay it right side up. And then take that pocket slip panel that you just made and lay that right on top of it. And what you're going to do is you're going to line up this top edge that we just top stitched so that it is 1/8 of an inch above this edge of the lining. Because if you line it up exactly, that lining is going to peek through. And we don't want that. So we're just going to have it go 1/8 of an inch over. So what I do is I just look at the top edge of my lining right here and I match that up with the top stitching that I just made, like that. And then I'll clip those together. And I'll do the same thing on the other side, lining up the top stitching with the top edge of the lining and clip together. And that way, this little slip pocket here kind of covers the lining a little bit. You don't have that little orange strip or whatever lining color you're using kind of peeking through. So then go down the sides and make sure you have all of that lined up. So I'm just going to add a couple clips to the top here, but not all the way down the side. So what we're going to do now is we're going to flip up this exterior panel up like that. And we're focused now on the bottom edge of our lining. So we don't want this to shift. You might notice that one lining panel is a little bit longer than the other. That's perfectly fine. We're just going to clip along this bottom edge here. And we're not tugging on this to flatten anything out. We're letting this kind of roll up like that. And now you're going to sew along this bottom clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. One is longer than the other, that's fine. Do the 1/4 inch along the shorter edge. This is an inside pocket. You're not really going to notice, you know, if it's a little bit off. So just all the way across the bottom edge. So once that's sewn, now you can lay down that exterior panel and flatten everything out really nicely. And then grab some clips and clip that little lining slip pocket to your exterior. So now I'm clipping through all of the material. Okay, so now we can just baste the sides that we just clipped down at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's just to hold the lining pocket to the back panel so you don't have to worry about anything moving around. Oh, that is looking good. Now we want to grab these side panels. So remember, you should have a couple mirrored pairs. So grab one pair. Now we're going to line them up on either side just like this. Isn't that cute? So what you're going to want to do is you might notice that the center panel is longer than the edges of these. If that's the case, then you're going to trim down the bottom edge here. So you can see I have about 1/4, maybe 3/8 of an inch on the bottom edge here. I'm going to trim that down so that it's all the same size. All right, so that is trimmed down. So now these should line up pretty perfectly. So let's start on the right side. We're going to take that right side panel and lay our right sides together with the center panel and just grab some clips and clip it in place. I like to start at the top and the bottom first, and then smooth it out in between. All right, so I have one attached. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the left side, just right sides together and clip along the straight edges. So now we're going to sew along both of these edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You want to make sure you're careful of these O-rings up here. So as you get close to them, just kind of feel for it and pull them out of the way if you need to. You should have enough give here to move it. You don't want to hit that with your needle. So I had to switch out my presser foot because my walking foot was too big to get close to these O-rings. So now what we're going to do is we're going to fold the side panels back, and the seam is going to go behind the side panels. So you can just finger press this if you're using cork or anything. Otherwise you can grab an iron and press it with an iron if you'd like. I'm just going to gently press here. There we go. And now we're going to top stitch along these edges on the side panels at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Pretty. So I know that this wrinkling is probably driving some of you guys nuts. So let's give it a little press from the back real quick. So this cork doesn't have like a woven or felt backing, so I'm gonna just be very careful. I'm not using any steam, I'm just using heat here. Ooh, that just wrinkled right up, didn't it? Well, that's not good. All right, so we gotta be a little careful with this cork. I would say probably not a high heat. Probably a lower heat. And just real quick. You never know with different materials how it's going to behave. So this is, like I said, this is a much thinner cork than I'm used to using. But I thought it would be good with the machine. And so far, I mean, it's good. It's sewing great, and it's not ripping or anything, which is what I was worried about. I was worried that as I was sewing, it would start ripping, and I haven't seen that happen. So far, so good. So your back panel is now done. Go ahead and set it to the side. I forgot to mention that I'll be using a metal bag tag today because I have hundreds of them, and I gotta do something with them. Okay, the pattern suggests placing your bag tag, if you have one, on the exterior front panel here. This is like the bigger bottom panel, and 5 inches up from the bottom, because remember, we will be boxing this bag, so we're going to lose quite a bit of material down here. So don't put it down there. You're going to regret that. So 5 inches up from the bottom and centered. So to do that, I can just fold this in half and then use my scissors to kind of clip just a tiny triangle, and that helps me mark the center. And then I just mark a dot where that is, and I've already lost it. This is why it's nice to have multiple marking tools, because sometimes one just doesn't show up that well. So I marked a dot where my center point is 5 inches up, and I'm going to use the washer for my bag tag. So you can see it's just this little metal washer, and I'm going to mark where the prongs go, because that's how this installs, with prongs. All right, so now I have those marked on my fabric. I'm also going to grab a scrap piece of Decoville Light, because again, with quilt cotton, you have to be careful with any of the metal stuff kind of pulling on the material too much. So I'm going to mark those same prong placements on my Decoville Light. There we go. So now I can take my seam ripper, and I'm going to seam rip those 4 slits. So 2 on my Decoville Light and 2 on my quilt cotton. So then I just pull up the prongs on my tag, insert that through the quilt cotton, apply the Decoville over it, and then apply the washer, and then spread it open, and then I will take another piece of Decoville Light and make sure it's bigger than as far as those prongs go out. This whole thing is probably fine. And you can iron it on. I think yeah, since I already have my iron on, I can just press this in place. So I'm just pressing from the back of the Decoville. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you are struggling to press it with an iron, just grab some glue and glue this on. And what this is doing is this is preventing those prongs from rubbing against whatever material is going to be behind this. It might be waterproof canvas, it might be quilt cotton, but if those prongs just keep rubbing against material for a long time, it's going to rip it eventually. So this is just going to protect it. And you can use any sort of interfacing. You can use fusible fleece, you can use woven interfacing. I just happen to have the scrap of Decoville Light, so that's where it's going. All right, so now to try to make sure that's straight. There we go. So that's how I do my metal bag tags. So now I have that bottom panel, and then I have my zipper. And when the zipper is closed, I want it going towards the left. So I'm going to kind of pull it like that. And then I'm going to take my zipper and lay it right side down along the top edge here. So you want it to overhang a little bit on each side, so that way if there's any shifting or anything, you don't have to worry about your zipper end not being in the seam over here. You want to make sure everything is nice and closed off. So just clip along this edge here with your zipper tape. I'm going to pull this off as far as I can get it without losing it. And this is the bonus of keeping your zipper tape a little bit extra long, is that you can kind of move the zipper pull out of the way. So now we're going to baste this on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. This is just to hold it in place. Now grab one of your zipper pocket linings, and you're going to lay it right side down along the top edge, and it should match up on the sides, so make sure it does. And then just clip these together. So now, ideally, we want to sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. With my presser foot, since I don't have a zipper presser foot, I might not be able to do that. So if not, then I'll just do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You just want to get as close as you can to the zipper teeth, because it kind of hides most of the tape. Yeah, so the best I could do was a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is fine. So now we want to press everything wrong sides together. So I'm going to lift up my lining and finger press it. And then I'm going to grab my iron, and I'm going to press right along that seam so it's behind the lining. And again, that just kind of makes the backing of my waterproof canvas turn into like a tape, and it sticks together, which is great. So then we're going to flip it like this and make sure the sides are lined up really well. So organize it, pull it down, get your zipper pull out of the way, make it look nice, and then I'm gonna press right along this edge here. So now I'm just gonna top stitch right along this edge on the fabric at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now lay this right side up and grab your C1 pattern piece, which is that little top zipper strip, and you're gonna lay it, make sure if you have orientation here, you think about that, you're gonna lay it right side down along the top edge of your zipper tape, and just make sure you're lining it up with the sides of your bottom panel. Grab some clips and clip it together. So now just baste along this top edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now take this unit and flip it over so you're looking at the back of your zipper tape, and then take your last zipper pocket lining template, and you're gonna lay that zipper pocket lining right side down along the back of the zipper tape and line it up on that top edge, making sure you're lining up the sides as well. So now we're gonna sew along this, if you can, at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm just gonna sew it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance because again, I don't have a zipper foot. So once these are sewn on, you're actually going to leave this zipper panel lining down. You're not going to press it up, but flip it over so you're looking at the right side of your exterior fabric, and then flip up that top panel, and we want the seam to go only behind the top panel. The lining zipper panel stays down. So just give it a really good press right up there to get that as straight as possible. So now we can just top stitch along this top edge. Remember, on the back here, both lining panels are facing down. So now looking at the back side, we're gonna clip these lining panels together, but we're not gonna clip them to the exterior fabric. So if one edge is longer than the other, again, that is fine. It's not a big deal. So we're going to clip along this edge, and you can see I can lift it up. We're just doing this so that it all stays together. All right, so now what you wanna do is you wanna lift the exterior fabric away from that pocket panel. And just like we did on the slip pocket, we want to sew along this bottom edge here at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm doing a 1/4 inch obviously away from the shorter side because I have like a 1/2 of an inch here. So I'm going to do a 1/4 of an inch away from the shorter side, and then you can trim down any excess overhang you have over here. So those are sewn together, and I'm just going to remove the excess. You really don't need to do this. You can leave that excess. It's not going to hurt anything, but I'll remove it. So now go back to this and lay everything out again just like this, and now we are going to clip the sides to the exterior panel and the lining, because now we want everything to come together. So now just baste along these edges. You're going to go over the zipper tape, so if you're like me and your zipper pull is overhanging, go ahead and bring that back into the middle. We don't want to sew the zipper pull off the edge, and we're going to sew along the entire lining with the pocket through the exterior and through the zipper tape to just hold everything together. Here we go, there's your front pocket. It's looking cute. So I'm gonna trim down the zipper tape so that it's all one nice rectangle now. So now lay this zipper unit right side up, grab that other top panel, and we're gonna lay it on the top edge just like that, and then flip it down so it's right sides together, and use your clips to clip in place. Now let's sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So now take that top panel and flip it down like that. And so the seam is gonna go behind this little zipper panel here. If you want, you can press it with an iron. I'm just gonna give it a good finger press since it is a pretty tight area and I don't want my iron to accidentally go over this cork. And now we're going to top stitch right along this top zipper panel. So the seam, remember, is underneath the zipper panel. Top stitch right along there at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Finally, once these are all attached, you're going to grab your remaining side panels, and we're going to attach those to the side just like we did on the back. And just like on the back, go ahead and measure and make sure you don't have any overhang. If your center panel is a little too long, like mine is, since I had to adjust the stitch length on the zipper, I'm going to just trim off this edge down here. There we go. So now this is the same length as the side panels, and so I'm just going to take my side panel and fold it in right sides together, and grab some clips and clip these together. All right, so you can see I clipped both of them. So now we're going to sew along both of these clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once these are attached, you're just going to fold those panels away from the center so that the seam goes behind the side panels. And depending on your material, you can use an iron to press this down or just use your fingers. I'm just going to use my fingers. All right, and now let's top stitch along these two edges on the side panel side so that the seam allowance is getting top stitched to the outer edges. And there you go, your front panel is done. How cute is this? I love this. Let's get that zipper over there. I love it. All right, so now we're gonna build the exterior. So take your front and your back panels and lay them right sides together. Match up all the edges, but specifically, we're matching up the bottom edge right down here. So make sure that is all lined up and clipped together. Now let's sew along this bottom edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to open this seam and press it open. So I'm going to show you. So this can be a little tricky. The thing about this though is that it doesn't need to be that neat. You're not going to see it in the end. I'm going to press it a little bit with my iron, at least along the fabric portions. And I'm trying not to touch. I'm trying not to touch the cork, and I'm trying not to touch the waterproof canvas on the sides over here. There we go. And then for the cork side, I'll just feel that with my fingers. So what we want to do now is we're going to flip this over, take it back to the sewing machine, open up the seam so both sides are going to their own sides, and you're going to top stitch 1/8 inch away from that middle seam on both sides. So we're just flattening out the seam. That's the only purpose of this. You're never going to see this, so if it's ugly, that's okay. We're just trying to flatten out this seam as much as possible. So we have a nice big unit for our exterior. This is definitely when I'm starting to feel the small size of my sewing machine. Go ahead and put that to the side for just a moment. So now grab your bottom panel and your bottom panel stabilizer, and you want to center your stabilizer over the back of your bottom panel. You can mark and measure if you'd like. It's not that big of a deal, but you want to get it centered. So now I'm going to grab some scrap fabric, and what I can do with this is just kind of lay it over the back of my material, and then I'm going to use steam and high heat, and I'm going to fuse from the back of the Peltex. You need to get it as fused as possible, but if it's not perfectly fused, that's okay, because we're actually going to stitch the Peltex in place as well. All right, I'm going to lift the scrap off, and when I flip this over, now I have that in place. I'm telling you, this cork is interesting. And now what you want to do is fold this raw edge around the long edge of your stabilizer. This is easiest if you use tape here. So I'm going to apply my tape right along the very edge of my cork, and hopefully I won't end up sewing over that. If you sew over it a little bit, it's fine. You just don't want to sew over it for a long period of time. So now remove the paper from your tape, and then just fold it over and tape it down. Just wrapping right around the edge of that heavy stabilizer. Do this for both sides. Okay, now you can top stitch along both of these folded over edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now on the back of your bottom piece, you're gonna mark the midpoint along the short edges. So I'm just gonna fold it, pinch it, and I think I'll cut it. So I'll make the tiniest little triangle cut. Do this for both short edges. So now lay out your exterior so that it's right side up, and we're going to be focused on the center right here between the two pieces. Take your base and you're going to line it up so that it's covering the bottom, and that midpoint mark on the base goes with the seam that connects the two panels together. So you might find this easier to use clips or tape, whatever you want to use. You just want to get this applied to the bottom. I use a couple clips to get it lined up mostly. And then I'll also grab some tape and just put it right along the center here. So if you wanted to add purse feet to this, you would attach your purse feet to this base piece first, or you could attach it after you sew it onto the bottom of your bag. It's up to you. But you can add purse feet to this. Okay, so now I have it centered, I have it taped and clipped in place. So now we're going to top stitch along all 4 edges of this base panel at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now take your exterior panels and fold them in right sides together, and let's match up the sides. So starting at the top, match up those top corners and then grab some clips and clip in place. So I'm going to start at the top corner and then also the bottom corner. And I know that base is fighting you just a little bit, but start at the top and the bottom and then just kind of pull, and they should line up perfectly. So do this for the other side as well. All right, now you're going to sew along both these clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. If you're using a thicker material for the sides, you're going to want to do another row of stitching, but don't go right over the stitches you already made. You're going to want to go just outside, just like less than 1/8 of an inch outside towards the raw edge of the first stitching. So do this for both sides. Once you have the sides sewn together, now we just have to box the bottom. So you're going to rotate it so you have this little opening down here, and you're just going to line up the seam from the sides with the seam on the bottom and open the seam allowance on the side. And then clip the centers together first, and then pull out towards the edges and clip along the edges. I like to clip over here on the fold too. I feel like that helps hold it all together. There we go. So do the same thing on the other side, just pulling them right sides together and matching up the centers first. Opening that seam allowance on the side panel. All right, so now we have both of these corners clipped, and we're going to sew along them at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And then once again, you're going to do a second row of stitching just outside of that first row. All right, before we turn this right side out, along the top raw edge, go ahead and mark 1 inch down along both panels. Now let's flip the bag right side out. And this should be pretty easy to do. And just poke out the corners around your base. If you still want to add purse feet, you have time to do that. You can still add the purse feet now, so take a look at it and then decide. It looks really cute. Okay, so we have that 1 inch mark along the top edge. I'm gonna grab some double-sided tape, and I'm just going to add it to the very top raw edge around the entire top of the bag. And when you get to the side seams over here, make sure you open them. That will really help when we top stitch this top edge. All right, once you have that tape added to the top edge all the way around, just slowly peel off the paper. So I just do one section at a time. And then fold your material wrong sides together so that the raw edge with the tape meets up with that 1 inch marked line. So we're just folding the top edge down a 1/2 of an inch. So do this all the way around. Take your time. Again, make sure you open up the seams over here really well. Alrighty, so that top edge is completely folded down. Make sure you give it a good finger press. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch along this top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Alright, that is top stitched in place. And at the beginning and the end of your top stitching, you can choose to back stitch both times, or you can just not back stitch and leave the tails, the bobbin and the top thread tails nice and long. And then what you can do is go to the back and pull on that bobbin thread and pull those top thread loops to the back. So just like that, pull that back. Do this for both bobbin threads and top threads. And then once you have all 4 threads on the back here, you can just kind of double them up and just triple knot them. And that will hold it together really nicely, and it gives a nice clean finish on the front where you don't have like a little bulk of threads that maybe don't line up perfectly. It just looks a little bit neater. And then just trim down those threads. All right, so your exterior is all done, ready to go. Let's work on the lining. So to prep the lining, you're gonna need your lining panels, your Decoville light, and the remaining Peltex. So let's just one at a time. Let's take one lining panel and lay it wrong side up. Then grab a Decoville light panel and lay it shiny glue side down and center it over the back of your waterproof canvas or your lining, whatever you're using. Once again, I'll grab my scrap fabric, and I'll have to do this in sections, but with high heat and a lot of steam, we're going to fuse the Decoville light onto the back of the waterproof canvas from the back side of the Decoville light. Once you have the Decoville light fused on, then grab your Peltex or Decoville Heavy, and you're gonna center this, so you should see it centered right along those box bottoms, and it should be just 1/8 of an inch below the top edge of your Decoville light. And then I'm gonna cover that up and fuse that on behind the Decoville light. And this creates a really, really strong structure for this bag. So once you have one lining panel prepped, go ahead and repeat that with the other lining panel and stabilizers. Okay, so once you have all of the interfacing applied, you can use the template to mark the placement for the magnetic snaps, or you can use the measurements that the template provides. So I'm actually going to use the measurements the template provides, and I'll show you. You want to make sure you get it the same on both of them, because if the magnetic snaps are a little off, they're not going to close properly in your finished bag. I forgot that I need 2 sets of magnetic snaps, so I'm just going to grab the other combo. So now I'm going to grab my hole punch, and I'm going to punch the holes out where I marked. And I'm just going to do one panel at a time, because I really want to make sure they line up. Alright, so just make sure you poke out any material that's in there. And what you can do to make sure that these fit together perfectly is get the other lining piece that doesn't have the holes punched in it yet, and lay your lining piece with the holes punched in it, line them up perfectly, and then use a marking tool and just poke inside those holes. And that should make sure these magnetic snaps end up in the right spot. Lift it up, there we go. So now that I have those marked on the other lining panel, I'm going to punch those holes out as well. So you can just pick one side to put the male snaps and one side to put the female snaps. I would put the same kind on the same side. So for example, this one right here, I'm doing the male snaps. And you can see with the rivet, you just pop it on there and you're done. You don't have the prongs, you don't have a washer, you don't have anything like that. You just pop it in, and then we can press it with our rivet press. So on this other side, I'm going to put the female sides of the magnetic snaps. Okay, so now I'm just going to grab my rivet press and take out the rivet die. And then for the magnetic snap die, the top die just kind of looks like a die for a rivet. And then the bottom dies either look like the male end or the female end of the snap. So I'm putting in the side that looks like the male end, and that will go with the female magnetic snaps. You just do it rivet side up, kind of pop it in there, and push down. So do this for both female ones. You can see it's nice and secure, and the nice thing too is this rivet is not going to wear down material. There's nothing pokey or sharp or anything. It's nice. So now I just take out the bottom die and replace it with the bottom die that looks like the female end. Then I grab the lining with the male snaps, insert those, and press them down. And you might want to just test it out real quick. Snap them together. There we go, everything's lined up. Perfect. Perfect, perfect. Okay, just to prepare for future, on the wrong side of each of these lining panels, you can use a ruler and make a mark that is 1 inch down from the top edge. Now take both your lining panels and lay them right sides together. And then line up the edges and the bottom and clip it all together. Make sure you also clip along the bottom edge. And now we're going to sew along the sides and the bottom at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I do recommend back stitching down here around the box corners because we will be pulling on those a little bit later. So once you have the sides sewn, we're going to box the corners. So just pull on the corners of your little box and line up the bottom seam and the side seam and make sure you press open those seam allowances, or honestly for this one you can just press them in opposite directions. That's probably going to be easier with the material I'm using. So I'm just going to go in opposite directions and just kind of pinch down here on the bottom, and your Peltex may be trying to come up. Don't let it. If you start having a real hard time with that, you can always grab some glue and glue it down. But ideally, the Peltex will stay fused. So you can see I'm going to add clips here. Now this is the lining, so if it's not perfect, that's okay. Do the same thing on the other side. Just flip these seam allowances in opposite directions. And clip where they line up first, and then clip out towards the corners. And with all this interfacing the way it's set up, it should just kind of naturally go into its ideal shape. All right, so now we're going to sew along these two clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so once those are boxed, we're going to press down this top edge to meet that 1 inch mark that we made earlier. And I'm going to use double-sided tape again, just like I did on the exterior. So I'm just going to go around the entire top edge, adding my double-sided tape. And by adding it to the very top edge, that makes sure that I won't end up sewing over it. And then once I get to the side seams over here, once again, press those open. It is important that you press the seams open on the sides to reduce the bulk. And then once you have the tape on there, you can just remove it section by section and then fold down your lining to meet that marked line. And then once you get to the side seams over here, just make sure you open up the side seam all the way down when you're folding. All right, once you have that all set, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch around the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that can be a little tricky because of how structured this bag is right now. That's what actually having the smaller machine is kind of an advantage right now. It's a lot easier to sew this. You can see I took the bed off my machine and it's just like a smaller space. So that's actually really helpful right here. So as you can see, once again, I'm just pulling these threads from the top to the back. It doesn't have to be pretty. So all 4 threads are on the back and I'm just going to triple knot these just like I did with the exterior, so you just don't see them. So now we're going to attach the lining and the exterior. And I like to do this before I attach the straps just because it's less stuff to worry about. This is called a drop-in lining because you take the lining, the exterior is right side out, the lining is wrong side out, and you just drop the lining into the exterior. Now before we get going, I want to test out my lining. And because that lining is so structured, if it's not the right size, we have to fix it before we top stitch. So looking at this, actually we're okay. What I found with the other one I made was, maybe it was because of the material I was using, but when I put the lining in, I had a substantial amount of the lining sticking out over the exterior, and I couldn't get it any further. So if that happens, what you can do is you can take out your lining and you can go along this boxed edge right here and just go at like a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you can reduce the size of your lining by just increasing the seam allowance on the boxed edge. but this looks okay. So I'm gonna insert my lining all the way into my exterior. So now starting at the seams, line up your lining and exterior side seams so that they're in the same exact spot, and add a clip. Do this with the other side as well. And then you're just gonna go around lining up the top edges of your lining and exterior and clipping together. You might have to kind of mush it around a bit to get it just right. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to top stitch along this top edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And this is why we were doing everything before at 1/4 inch seam allowance, because we don't want to just go over the first stitches. This is actually going to be a little bit easier, I think, at my small machine rather than my industrial, because my industrial, when I was making the vinyl version of this, it's a complete flat bed, so I can't wrap this around the arm and get really tight under the needle. In this case, with a smaller domestic machine, I can. So we're going to do that. We're just going to go 1/8 of an inch, nice and slow all the way around, making sure that we're lining everything up. If the exterior and the lining start to shift, don't keep going. Stop, readjust, and then keep going, okay? Okay, once you have that top stitch, check to make sure you caught the lining everywhere, because that's the main concern. All right, that looks good. And that can be challenging, but the thing I want you to remember is to squish the bag down. I know it's really structured and you don't want to squish it, but if your machine isn't gonna let you sew that, you have to squish it. So squish the bag down if you need to. And then, of course, my piece of advice always is to go slow, but really go slow and just focus on the inch in front of you. Don't worry about the rest of it. Don't get yourself in a hurry. The inch in front of you, just focus on that. All right, so you can see I left the tails again on this. So I'm gonna go to the lining side and pull on those bobbin threads to pull the top threading to the back. And then I will give these a triple knot from the lining side. Once you have those knots made, you're gonna trim down the threads close to the knot. And then just burn off the ends with a lighter. Just be careful. You don't want to, burn anything besides the threads. Look how pretty this is. Even without the vinyl, this bag is so structured. It looks so good. Holy guacamole. So the last thing we have to do is attach the straps. So I will be doing this with rivets. That's how the instructions are laid out as well. If you want to sew it, you can, but it can be pretty challenging to sew it. If you don't have a rivet press, another option are Chicago screws. You can use that, so you can punch the holes, screw them together, and it will still be as nice. So you don't have to have a rivet press here, but if you do have one, definitely take advantage of it and use it. So for this setup, we're gonna mark a series of dots. We're gonna have 2 rivets on the end of each strap. So we're gonna mark 1/4 of an inch away from the inner edge of the strap end, and mark a centered dot, and then mark another one that is 3/4 of an inch from the inner edge of that strap end. And then you're gonna mark 2 1/4 of an inch in from that strap end, and then 2 3/4 of an inch in from that strap end. All right, so you're gonna mark these dots on all 4 ends of your straps. And then after you have all those dots marked, you're gonna take your hole punch and punch each one of those holes out, doing your best to make sure that the holes stay centered, and just punch the holes out of all 4 ends. So once you have those holes punched out, grab your rivets and grab your bag. And what you want to do is you want to take your strap wrong side up, so you're looking at the back of your strap end, and you're going to insert it into the O-ring, and you're just going to fold it up. So that way when I fold the strap up like this, you don't see it. When I fold it down, you see that lovely end. And now just insert your rivet through the matching holes. You should be able to match up 2 of the 4 holes. Just snap them together like that. So after you have that in there, make sure you keep your strap straight as you bring it around. So I'm keeping it, I'm pulling it straight towards me, and then I'm wrapping it around. And then I'm going to, again, it should be wrong side up, and I'm going to insert that through the O-ring, wrap it around, and then insert my rivets with their matching holes. And then you have a strap. Isn't that lovely? That's a beautiful strap. So I'm gonna go ahead and press these. Like I said, you could do this with a sewing machine if you wanted to. It would be a little tricky, but not too bad actually, because it does come up enough. You could do a nice little box and then a zigzag through it. So I will just set all 4 of these rivets. There we go, there's one strap. So I'm just gonna repeat that with the other side and the other strap. All right, the straps are done. Are you ready to see this beauty? It's so pretty. Look at how shiny it is. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, this cork is on the thinner side for sure, but I love how shiny this is. This is a beautiful, beautiful bag. And the straps came together really nice. You can see we have the little rivets. You can see the strap ends on the back. Love the O-ring detail. I think that's such a fancy detail. I feel like if it didn't have the O-ring, it just wouldn't look as fancy, you know? Like, you could raise the price of your bag pretty significantly by just adding this little detail because it makes it look more expensive. So on this bag, you can see I do have the magnetic snaps closed. So because the material is a little bit thinner than my first bag, I can actually close the top of the bag. On my first bag with that really heavy vinyl and all the extra stuff, it is pretty difficult to actually close those magnetic snaps. But since I used thinner material here, I'm able to actually close the snaps. Holy guacamole, this is adorable, isn't it? Oh my goodness, this is so stinking cute. So I hope you love making this Muerqo tote as much as I do. If you make one and you post it on social media, make sure you tag me. I'm at OklaRoots over on Instagram and Facebook. I would love to see your version. I could make a million of them. I mean, I really could. I could make so many of these. And this is the type of bag that's good for everybody. So if you have baby shower, birthday, wedding, anything at all going on and you're like, I want to gift them something handmade, but you know, if I'm going to take the time to make it, I want them to actually like it. This is a great go-to bag for that. I mean, it looks great. It's a nice big size. It's nice and open on the inside. Again, depending on who you're making it for, you could definitely add some slip pockets, maybe a little elastic pocket, zip pocket. You could add all kinds of stuff to it. And it's just like, it's just the perfect bag. This is the perfect bag. So I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.